Day 873 of the Ukrainian War Map, also known as the Russo-Ukrainian War. Juzzie here, and today is another update as I take a simplified and down-to-earth approach to some of the most important happenings on the ground in Ukraine. So starting off, we'll take a look at those Russian losses, as currently Russia sits on more than 562,000 military personnel losses, representing an additional 1,110 in the past day. Then as for hardware losses, 11 tanks, 9 APVs, and a whopping 43 artillery, and 1 air defense system. But as for the tanks in this list, Russia just hit a milestone, but maybe not the kind that they wanted. Now with the loss of 100 T-90M tanks, as evidenced by open source reporting, and the T-90M variants at 2.5 million to 4.3 million apiece, depending on their configuration, are something that Vladimir Putin himself several times called the cutting edge and best tanks in the world, with no Western analogues. For instance, in 2023, Putin stated, quote, "As soon as it approaches positions, no chance is left for anyone or anything." But certainly, even just 1 or 2 dozen of these tank losses would put that into question, but 100 tanks? Well, here's the thing, the T-90M tanks are based on the 1990s, early 1990s T-90 tanks, which are in turn based off the T-72 tank in the early 1970s. So it's an upgrade from an upgrade from an upgrade. So I would say more evolutionary than revolutionary. Then headed to the map and inside of Russia, and this one is more of a peculiarity more than anything else, as we've most recently been exposed to new satellite imagery that shows that Russian President Vladimir Putin has fortified his Valdai residence in the Novgorod Oblast with an absolutely extensive network of air defense systems. And this is just one of 3 or 4 of his main residents. So the satellite imagery revealed that at least 7 Pantsir S-1 and 11 S-300/S-400 surface-to-air missile systems, along with long-range radar stations, were positioned at his northern palace, all as a means to hopefully create a very formidable protective dome for Putin. And these air defenses are strategically placed, multiple Pantsir S-1 systems within 2 to 3 miles of Putin's residence, and another nearby concentration housing the mentioned 11 S-300/400 air defense systems. So this elaborate setup forms a multi-layered defensive perimeter, albeit a very paranoid one, with the placements positioned along roads suggesting a focus on mobility and rapid deployment, or redeployment. So the utter or sheer scale and sophistication of these defenses underscores the lengths taken to protect the Russian leader, which raises a lot of questions about perceived threats, and the resources allocated to Putin's personal security while he wages a war in Ukraine. But perhaps most interesting is how Prigozhin, the former Wagner mercenary leader from Russia, whose plane, when traveling from St. Petersburg to Moscow on the day of his plane crash, was directly crossing this flight path within Putin's dome of protection. Feel free to speculate on that one. Then headed further south on the map as a wildfire has erupted in a pine forest near Novotabolzanka in the Belgorod region. Local emergency services have not yet responded to the blaze, as of last reporting, and reportedly due to a lack of official orders to do so. Oh, and then as for this oblast, Belgorod Governor Gladkov just made a statement saying that 14 settlements along the border to Ukraine, where access will be closed, abandoned houses will be used by the Russian military. So it looks like Russia is getting that sanitary zone along the border as promised. Except it's in Russia, as they condemn those homes to complete destruction. Then nearby on the map to Ukraine's northeast, as the Russian military command has stated that they have deployed forces to conduct offensive operations in the Hiloboka region, all as part of Russia's ongoing Kharkiv incursions. And this would be a direct response to recent Russian land losses around the settlement, although this latest communicated development may be just mere words by the Russian command, as the Russian MOD is already known to have been throwing everything they can into this area on a daily basis. And by everything, I mostly mean manpower, as everything else is not in big supply for which to support their manpower with. But I shouldn't speak too soon because, speaking of this location, we saw a Russian tank resembling structure, a battle barn or a blight barn if you will, which was destroyed at the entrance to the same settlement. And perhaps even more interesting in this region is how we saw Russia's latest self-propelled howitzer, the new 152mm 2S-43 Molva, seemingly not getting the lifespan utility as some of the older Soviet stuff, as these photographs show what appears to be this SPG dealing with the outcome of a HIMARS rocket strike, and with damage from the ensuing tungsten balls. So here we see some side damage and every wheel is now flat, although depending on the condition of the howitzer itself on the chassis, it may live to see another day. Though with a maximum firing range of 24.5 kilometers, which is an official Russian reported range, means that it has to get up a little closer to the fight in comparison to the Ukrainian operated SPGs that are more at the 30 to 40 kilometer range, typically. Then headed down the map to, for instance, Chasiv Yar, as Russian offensive efforts are still dealing with the task of consolidating positions up to the canal. But otherwise, no actual positional changes on the map within this axis for exactly 2 weeks now. Although plenty of activity nonetheless, with Ukrainian border guards showcasing the destruction of enemy equipment near Bakhmut in a recent video upload. So the footage highlights the work of drone operators destroying several enemy assets, including a light vehicle, a military truck, 2 D-20 howitzers, a D-30 howitzer, and an MT-12, which is an old Soviet 100mm anti-tank gun. Then further south in the Toretsk direction, as there's been some level of back and forth with both Russian and Ukrainian forces. Take for instance just southwest of New York, and using the day calendar to see the changes in positions in the last day, yesterday, then today, yesterday again, then today again. Which is actually a bit of a rare oddity, as held or occupied positions don't usually move together like they have somewhat done here. So for something like that to occur to ground forces, it would usually be an indication of getting cornered somewhat. Which, zooming in, the Russian units are surrounded by 3 rivers. So there is likely to be a bit of attritional warfare going on there for the Russian infantry, as their storm assault units continuously get plunged into the forefront of the advancing formation, with each and every step just incredibly more dangerous or more attritional for the infantry of those advancing units. Then, even further south we go, as Ukrainian forces launched a significant attack on a Russian S-300 air defense battery near Manush, which is just west of Mariupol, and just over 80 kilometers, or about 50 miles, behind the front lines. The strike, occurring late last night, employed multiple ATACMS tactical ballistic missiles with cluster munitions. Ukraine's Commander-in-Chief, Alexander Syrsky, confirmed the operation, stating that the attack successfully hit the battery's radar station in several launches. Footage of the strike shows multiple missiles impacting the target area or the cluster munitions, suggesting extensive damage to the S-300 battery. All as the AFU continues degrading Russia's air defense network in the region, which has really been quite the commitment to the campaign. With, for example, Ukrainian forces landing hits on 15 Russian air defense systems in occupied Crimea alone over just the past 2 months. So it's quite a decent trade to be making for all of the 30-year-old ATACMS missiles in the US inventory to find a home on a Russian air defense system for roughly all 1,200 of the close to expiration date ATACMS missiles. Then taking a look around on the map, as somewhere in the east we saw an unsuccessful attempt of the Russian Lancet drone to destroy a Ukrainian-operated M777 howitzer, with the Lancet drone hitting the tree with something of an in-air impact or detonation instead. But most interesting here is the howitzer's firing position, as it stands in a trench with a folding roof, thereby minimizing its exposure, decreasing its targetable footprint. Then also, we saw how Ukrainian border guards destroyed a number of Russian Pergam RTR-150 video surveillance stations in northern Ukraine using just 4 FPV drones. This destroyed surveillance equipment happens to be a 36 times zoom with a detection range of up to 5.5 kilometers, which is roughly 3.5 miles. Which the surveillance equipment would have seen this coming a mile away with no way to react. Then headed across to some news for today. So Ukraine and the Czech Republic have forged a significant military-industrial partnership, signing 2 key agreements for joint arms production. Ukrainian Prime Minister Denis Shmyhal announced the deals, which aimed to bolster Ukraine's domestic defense capabilities. The first agreement focuses on establishing a new cartridge factory in Ukraine. This facility, a collaboration between Czech companies Cellier and Belgorod and Ukrainian firm Ukroboronservice, will enhance Ukraine's ability to produce its own ammunition, a critical factor in sustaining its defensive efforts. And under the second agreement, Ukraine will begin domestic production of assault rifles in partnership with the Colt CZ Group, a renowned Czech firearms manufacturer. This move is expected to modernize and expand Ukraine's small arms capabilities, and the partnership could also have long-term implications for Ukraine's military readiness and its integration into Western defense standards, as Ukraine could one day be a lower-cost arms manufacturer producing to NATO spec, given their increasingly skilled workforce in this arena, not to mention the lower labor costs and overall production costs to be gained as well. Then also in some very recent news, and this next news will be slow in coming, but Greece has just announced plans to decommission 32 old F-16 Block 30 fighter jets and send them to the US for modernization, after which they will be transferred to Ukraine. Then to some Russian economy news, as the Moscow stock market, or the Moscow Stock Exchange, has plummeted to a new low, dropping below 2,900 points for the first time since July of 2023. This significant decline marks a potential turning point in Russia's economic landscape, and it's important to note that Russia's strategy to counteract international sanctions involved implementing extensive spending programs. And while these initiatives initially propped up the economy, they appear to have created an artificial bubble in the market. Economists now suggest this bubble is on the verge of bursting, with the current stock market decline potentially indicating this could be the first visible sign of this economic correction. Now, if this trend continues, it may lead to broader economic repercussions for Russia, potentially affecting many sectors and the overall financial stability of the country. So it's developments or updates like these that highlights the long-term challenges Russia faces in maintaining economic growth under the pressure of ongoing international sanctions. Then moving on to throw in another quick stock standard traditional Russian military mobilization blunder segment. So Russian soldiers from the 7th Separate Guards Motorized Rifle Regiment, deployed in Ukraine, have made startling allegations about their treatment and conditions on the front lines. In a public appeal, they claim to have been misled about their deployment and subjected to severe hardships. The soldiers report that they were initially promised positions on the 2nd and 3rd lines of defense, aka barrier troops, which just happens to be the job where you shoot and aim for other Russian soldiers on the first line that retreat, but instead found themselves thrust into frontline assaults, ironically being subject to the very whims of the barrier troops back afield. They also describe enduring a month of grueling conditions without adequate food, water, or proper living arrangements. And of the original 110 soldiers in their unit, they claim that only 25 now remain. As such, they express their frustration and feelings of betrayal from their commanders, who they claim they've never even seen in person. So this latest example of an appeal was directed at Russian President Vladimir Putin and the public, seeking intervention and support. Though perhaps most noteworthy in this example is how the men said that they came to Ukraine to fight fascists, only to now admit that the fascist scourge is among their very own Russian military. And so events like these don't ever happen in isolation. Of course, it was just the other day that I mentioned about posters flooding Moscow for a 1.7 million ruble sign-up bonus to go to Ukraine, which is worth about 18,000 euros, and way up from an initial 2,000 euros many moons ago. So the cracks are more than just starting to show, as word spreads that if you go to Ukraine, you stay in Ukraine. Then headed to a super quick funny to round it all off today, guys, as another Russian tank upgrade just dropped. And those involved appear very proud at this latest achievement. And so, based on the civilians in the shot, this photo could have been taken in Belgorod, just beyond the border with their corresponding Kharkiv incursion activities. But what a chicken coop this is, or Noah's Ark maybe? Perhaps even an upside-down old battleship. So as you can see, the self-proclaimed world's second most powerful army continues to shine. Well, maybe after a buffing pad. So that's it for today, guys. Thanks again for watching. And as for a shameless self-plug, if you're keen to get your name or preferred nickname on the outro credits of these videos, check out my link for Patreon. Once joined on any of the 3 tiers, just flick me a message saying, "Hi Juzzie, this is my nickname." And voila, forever immortalized. And you also go a long way to help out the channel as well. So thanks again for watching, guys, and I do hope to see all of you there in the next one. Cheers!